If you're from Swiss Fall, hello. Do we have people from South Dakota? That's the only place I like. Well, I also like any other places. If you're from Texas, yeah. Well, originally I'm from Kenya. I was born and raised. Oh, we have a Kenyan? Yeah, I got carried away by the wind. I'm originally from Kenya. I grew up in Nairobi, in the east side of Nairobi, in a place called Korogocho. So if there was a good description or a better picture for you to understand what Korogocho is basically a slum. You can compare it to the ghettos, but it's not even a ghetto, it's worse than a ghetto. And let me draw a picture for you of where I grew up. I grew up in a 10 by 10, so which means some of our bathrooms, some of our houses are way, way, way bigger than the house I grew up in. It was a 10 by 10. I and my 3 other siblings, as well as my parents, we lived in this tiny little house. And we used to make a joke when I was growing up, and we used to call it a self-contained house, because you could reach the kitchen while still in the bedroom, you know? It's a self-contained house. And this is how life was, and this is where I found myself. I had no choice. If I had a choice, actually, I would have told God I want to be born somewhere in South Dakota. But it didn't happen. I just found myself in that place called Korogocho. When you walked outside of Korogocho, outside of my house rather, you will see the same houses as mine, bumper to bumper on each other. Some of the houses are made from corrugated iron sheets. Some of the houses are made from dirt. And these are the houses that we have. And everything is everywhere. And we had another joke, which we used to say, you might miss number 1 and step on number 2 as you walk outside. Because everything was everywhere. We didn't have good sewerage system, because everything was flowing on the surface. And as a child, growing up in this place called Korogocho, you will find me poking through raw sewer with sticks, because I didn't comprehend or understand whether the water was clean or dirty. As a child, you don't get to understand these things. But later on, I realized that indeed it has been God's grace and hand upon my life that I lived in that place beyond the age of 5, beyond the age of 10, beyond the age of 15, without dying from preventable causes or diseases like malaria, cholera, typhoid, which always break out every year in this place called Korogocho. And that was life, that was normal. Besides all the diseases and the situations and conditions of the houses, there is another thing. There are gangs everywhere. You know, I usually make a joke and say that Korogocho is one of the most volatile, the most dangerous places on earth after Detroit, you know. But the truth is, that place is worse than Detroit. Simply because as young as 8-year-old, 9-year-olds, they end up joining the gangs. And the end result is that so many of young people living in Korogocho or who grow up in this place end up maybe shooting each other as a result of inter-gang wars, or sometimes there will be conflict between the police trying to pacify the area, and they end up killing young people. And sometimes the police end up dying in the process. And so many other people end up dying, you know, from stray bullets. And so this was life, and this seemed normal at that time when I was growing up. But I don't think in today's society, in 21st century, that should be normal. Children should have, you know, an avenue to express themselves, to play, not on raw sewer, to be able to live and eat good food, not like the food I ate while growing up. And children should be able to enjoy going to school. Some of us, when you are told, oh, it's today, let's say tomorrow you're not going to school, right? But if you are going to school and your parent, you know, kind of like knocks on your door and wakes you up at around 6 a.m., you're like, oh, I don't want to go to school. Whereas children, where I grew up, they all yearn and they want to go to school because it's the only way out, it's the only solution. And so growing up in this place I'm calling Korogocho, which is still named Korogocho, is one place I will not even wish my own children to grow up in. But that's where I found myself. And that's how the conditions were. But I thank God because when I was 8 years old, Compassion International came into these slums of Korogocho. Compassion works with the church. And through the church, I was kind of like taken into the program. And a few months down the line, somebody from Texas, Austin, Texas, wrote me a letter and said, I'm your sponsor, and I'm going to be sponsoring you through Compassion. And they became my friends. You know, there's an ocean, but the friendship through the letters kept going for years. And these people, he was, the husband was an engineer, and he told me, I work as an engineer, I work for Verizon. I had no idea what Verizon is, But he told me he was an engineer, and I got curious, and I wanted to become an engineer. And I pursued my goal to become an engineer simply because somebody so many miles away told me that he was an engineer. Somebody so many miles away told me that they loved me. So many miles away, those people told me and called me their son. I felt like I was part of their family. I felt like I was inspired by them. Korogocho didn't inspire me because there was nobody to inspire me. There was nobody to challenge me. But then there were these people, all the way from Austin, Texas, kind of like giving me a purpose, giving me hope to be able to live through Compassion. And I worked so hard, and I wanted to become an engineer, but I ended up becoming a physicist. So I did not become an engineer. So I settled for something less. Sometimes when I think about it, I see Christ working through people, through the organization of Compassion. Because I do not know what I'll have turned out to be. I don't know, maybe I'll have become one of those, gang members who are killed at an early age. I don't know whether I'll have become one of those children. And mark you, I had a friend, his name was James, and James disappeared from the slums. And I asked my mom, where did James go? And my mom told me James went to live with a grandma up country. It's good, he went to live with grandma. It's nicer than Korogocho. Only to realize when I was like almost 15 that James had died from malaria. But my mom told me that to protect me. You see, I thank God that he used Compassion so that I could have, a coverage, a health coverage. Whenever I was sick, I'll be rushed to hospital. And everything worked for the goodness of the Lord. Because I don't know what I will become. Today, I'm a Christian simply because somebody through Compassion introduced me to Christ. They shared the gospel and told me that Christ loves me. Irrespective of where I'm living, Christ loves me nonetheless. And that's how I became a Christian. I don't know what I was before, and I don't know what I'll have become. Maybe I'll have become one of those African Voodoo spiritists, But I'm not, simply because I've known and have become a Christian. And this is exactly what Compassion does. They introduce us to Christ as children. Because God knows, and Satan knows, the heart of God. It's children. And so, to cut the long story short, I ended up continuing my education. Still through Compassion, they give me a scholarship, and I studied more physics. And today, I'm still studying more physics. I have no idea what I'm doing with it. I'm a PhD graduate student at the University of Colorado in physics. But it's all because of God's doing through Compassion, and through my sponsors, and through the people who He brought into my life. that I am here today sharing of His goodness with you. My challenge to you as young people is, will we take part and be like those teenagers who sponsored those, there are 2 gentlemen and a lady, right? 3 of them, they also came from rough conditions, but they all went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, and they pursued their graduate studies in theology, leadership, and I think in ministry. And one of them, Richmond, the one who says, in Jesus' name, you know, he is having an organization called Pastors Discipleship Network, and he's reaching out and educating African pastors. And so we never know what these children become. If my sponsors knew that I was going to become a physicist, they would be like, yeah, we want this, you know. Or if they knew one child was going to become a doctor, they'll be like, we want this. But we don't know. I and my wife today, we sponsor 4 children, and we have no idea what they'll become. But the best thing is that God knows what they will become. He's called them even before we picked them as packets. My challenge to you is, will you be a part of this? Will you take up a step and say, I'm going to sponsor this child? I know you'll tell me, oh, I'm still a student, I don't have money, but, you know, call your parents. And you can also do it as a group and sponsor a child for $38 a month. And you will see the change that it will bring to your life as well as to the life of that child. Today in my life, I am what I am simply because Christ has worked through compassion for me to be here and share the goodness of the Lord. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you for your time. And keep enjoying Swiss folk people. See you.